Hey everybody, cats and kittens, young lovers, welcome back. So I'd just like to state for the record that upon review of the previous episode, I discovered that immediately upon my noticing contradiction in my own arguments, I started walking in circles in the dungeon. The dungeon immediately became a plastic metaphor for the actual situation in which I found myself. Which is probably evidence that this is, a relatively good piece of art. No, it's not. That's apophenia. Apophenia is a word that William Gibson might have invented, might have not, I don't know. But it means overactive pattern recognition, which is another symptom that is caused by the too early taking on of the philosophical system that is built into games like this. Let me explain myself. So the thing is, games like this are full, as we previously discussed, of weird shit. The whole business, which I haven't even, embarked upon in this zone, with, the eggplant wizards, like the eggplant wizards who shoot eggplants at you, and then you have to go find the nurse who lives in the dungeon to undo your eggplants. None of this is explained to you in any way, particularly if you don't read the manual, which, like, as a small child, you didn't usually. So you've got this, like, you have these mechanics like this, you have these secret areas like this, which are, first of all, the programmer's ability to convey to you what is going on is limited by, oh, fuck me. Okay. It had to happen eventually, I suppose. I'm just going to revel in the frictionlessness of my eggplant scooting. Thank you. Thank you, kind nurse. Thank you so very much. But yeah, what I'm trying to convey to you here is that because the language of the programmers is limited by the limitations of the system they're working with, they have to try to pack a lot of meaning into a very short space. And so you get a lot of things where there is probably a way for you to have figured out how to do thing X. There probably, it's like, they're probably like, comprehensible bits of communication in there, but they're all rendered not only in, like, weird language vis-a-vis the limitations of the system, but also vis-a-vis the limitations of translation. So you get things like Northernmost Peninsula is the secret, or I am error. These gnomic little pronunciations. Yeah, I was so close. You see that? I was right by the door, and I kept going, and I kept going, and I kept going, and I didn't even realize that I had started to retrace my steps until the last moment. That is what a complex is, in case you're wondering. In case you're wondering why you keep doing stupid shit, in case you're wondering why I keep doing the same stupid shit, the treachery of a complex is that it makes you follow the same path over and over again without realizing that that's what you're doing. It steers you gently because it is built into your decision-making processes. The back part of your brain that handles decision-making processes is encoded. Oh God, the tragedy of your little guys. Oh God, this was the fucking humdinger in this game. You free your little soldiers who've been turned to stone by Medusa, and they all immediately die, no matter what you do. And they die in such a pathetic, sad way. They get palace swapped and they fall down and they make a terrible noise, and it's just like, oh, you feel so terrible for having released them from one prison only to consign them to oblivion immediately thereafter. Oh God, I think that was about 3 levels of digression within one anecdote, so I'm going to try to pull back a little bit. This guy's the Hudra, incidentally. First guy was Cerebus, this guy's the Hudra. We're still seeing, despite having only one head and being essentially a noodle, but he does shriek in such a wonderful way, doesn't he? Listen to that. Fuck. Yeah. Ugh. You wonder where my sadism comes from. Anyway, so the business that comes next that I was talking about. I wasn't talking about complexes, doing the same thing over and over again, like making nested anecdotes that there's no way to get yourself out of. I was talking about overactive pattern recognition, because you get all of these hints that are not only, you know, meant to be like cryptic, but they are also meant to be but they're also obscured both by the systemization and by the difficulties of translation, both in terms of just the character limit. You can't get as much information into the same physical space on the screen in English characters as you can in kanji, and in terms of the ineptitude of the translators, in terms of and in terms of the cultural reference that you're not getting. It's like a lot of this stuff, you know, I'm not saying this game, but a lot of this stuff would be at least a little bit more normal to you if you'd grown up with the same kind of spooks and goblins and ghosts and stuff as the programmers had grown up with. So what this leads you to is a sort of slightly maniacal desire to uncover secrets. Because unlike in, you know, your standard Western games, these Easter eggs can be so hidden that you never discover them at all. And so you get these legends of long standing, like even for later games, like there's, you know, it's like level 5 revive materia, you know, there's a way to bring Aerith back to life. But, you know, even things that are obvious, like, you know, at least theoretically obvious, the game could be full of stuff that you'll never see, because it seems like such an accident and such a miracle when you stumble upon content that's even a little bit obscured. Ooh, look, my cherry got lit. That you start looking for everywhere. And there's a lovely book about this called Lucky Wander Boy. It's I believe the only novel by the guy who wrote it, and it strikes me as the kind of first novel that can only really be semi-autobiographical, about a man who, you know, is in his like mid-20s and is lost, and, you know, is a writer but is also a jackass, like all writers are, and who, oh, I love this guy, he's so inexplicable. That's gonna be a tradition. We're gonna make that a thing. Anyway, about how he becomes fascinated with this arcade game, which it resembles in some ways like Takeshi's Challenge, which in itself, even though it was an absurd exaggeration of like the obscurity of video game goals, was not that much of an exaggeration, if you get me. But this guy who is like falls basically in love with this video game, which, you know, the question of whether it is actually magical, whether it is actually like transcendent and particularly special as video games go, is kind of left unanswered. And you know, eventually just chucks in his entire life and goes to Japan just to try to unravel his particular connection with this game and with its creator, who of course is a girl, because in the end this is all about trying to find, you know, understanding, love, and companionship. Because of the aforementioned complexes. And I would say that there's also a connection between, like, you know, the sort of overactive pattern recognition and not being very good at understanding other people, if you know what I mean. Like, if the these winged robbers are actually way easier to avoid than their previous cousins. So you get to a point where this guy basically chucks in his entire life to go meet this woman who is essentially just a business person and who made a game to make money, because that's what ultimately they are. They're a confluence of art, commerce, and like real world just restrictions, which made something that is more than the sum of its parts, which made something that is glorious and mysterious and leaves you with completely unrealistic expectations about how magical the real world might possibly turn out to be. If you catch my meaning, if you get my drift. I got an upgrade. My labor paid off. This game, you do get to this point sometimes, and you don't get that if you haven't been diligent enough in your killing, and that's great because it definitely teaches you. Because it doesn't explain why you do or don't get them. It just fucking leaves you an empty room, and that I can respect as a pedagogical technique. Anyway, pattern recognition, overactive pattern recognition, and this gets you in trouble in life, just as a general matter, because it's it's once again the driving force behind religiosity. It's the driving force behind superstition. Particularly if you feel like you're above that sort of thing, it can really fuck you in the ass. In a non-consensual and unprepared way, if you're not careful about it. But it was certainly for a game like this, the spectacle of those soldiers, of that harp which turns enemies into axes, which you don't even use for 4 levels, but eventually, by pressing the select button, the least useful button of all of the buttons, you turn your bow into a hammer or an axe, or some object, whatever the fucking object, the poorly rendered 8-bit object is supposed to be, and you use that to break the stone spell on those things which look like statues, and then they come and help you beat the boss, but are incredibly inept at helping you beat the boss. In a world like that, I can, sir, but I don't have to. You weakling. Yeah, fuck off. That's the other thing. Even when you no longer have to enact the rituals of capitalism, even when you no longer have to participate in the hazing, which is modern life, which is the people visiting the sins of the fathers on the sons, people who have been treated badly all of their lives and so then turn around and treat others badly because that's the only thing they've known. Even at that point when people are super rich, they will never need more money in their lives ever again, but they still play the fucking game. They're still robber barons. They still need to get more and more and more wealth. And that's because stopping feels like losing, even when you are to the point where there's no earthly reason for you to continue. So once again, these symbol languages, you're programmed, not by video games, but this video game reflects, as all art does, the circumstances that I wasn't paying attention, and I was hit by what I always interpreted as being some kind of inverted kidney bean with tendrils, but which appears to be a jellyfish that's been suspended in midair, which doesn't really make more sense per se, but it's definitely a thing that's happening. And these little honeycombs partially filled with mysterious red liquid. The heaven levels, I think, even though I love the design on all of the levels, the heaven levels, I think, are my favorite just because they're so unmoored from anything figurative whatsoever. The pinkness of the clouds, whatever the fuck these are supposed to be. At least in the early levels, you can kind of get your head around what the things that you're encountering are supposed to represent. It just gets very strange at this point. I'm pulling back. I want to talk a little bit more about that dungeon that we just went through. Speaking of overactive pattern recognition, and speaking of trying to come up with weaknesses in your audience to exploit. A thing that is sort of a truism in dungeon design at this point, and this is almost universally applicable throughout most games where exploration isn't the explicit goal. Oh, we're running into our object limit there. That was exciting. A truism is that if you're in a dungeon, if you're in some place that you need to explore, if you hit a dead end, there's going to be an item there waiting for you. Unless we're talking about really long backtracking, or particularly rather when we're talking about really long backtracking, there's always a reason for you to have done a thing in a game, and people speak about it as if it's bad design if there isn't. If there is just a mistake that you can make and there's nothing at the end of it and you just have to backtrack, that's considered to be a flaw. But it's like, that's not how dungeons work. Metaphorical or literal dungeons, you know, like, that's not how life works. That's not how navigation works. In a Kid Icarus dungeon level, like the one that we will encounter quite shortly, in a Kid Icarus dungeon level, it's just a grid. And there is no particular reason to take the wrong turning if you can avoid it, right? I mean, you can collect hearts if that's what you want, but if you're playing, you know, if you're playing well, you shouldn't really need it at that point. So what it is just sheer punishment for turning the wrong way, and there are no clues. It's all trial and error. It's all experimentation, and then it's all this long, you know, this attrition that you get. Oh, I'm not gonna do it. I'm gonna do it. It's gonna accomplish absolutely nothing. Poor game design, or a way to, or it doesn't make you understand the unfairness and futility of effort. This is a larger issue at hand here, which is the idea of whether making a game less fun necessarily makes it not as good. And this is an art discussion again, a sort of an art versus design discussion. Design implies that a game, if you think of a game as design, and like the companies that make games clearly think of them as designs, as toys, right? The same way that toys are designed and toys that are arts go in a museum. As you know, the video game exhibit at the moment is in the design area. It's not in the modern art area. Because, once again, these are objects for use. No, I can't do it. So if you think of them as objects for use, then any decision which makes a game less fun to play is a bad design decision. If you think about games as being art, and once again, I've previously said that art is that art and design are fundamentally inextricable, which doesn't really help with this particular discussion, so we're just going to abandon it. I'm large, I contain fucking multitudes, I'm a piece of shit. So a really large, like a really, like, you know, fragrant duke, that's what you're dealing with here. You know, you can tell me that I'm terrible, you can tell me that I'm worthless, and I'll agree with you, but you can't tell me I'm not big. I'm a big person. In all sorts of ways. I am a really large, noticeable, like wearing highway, you know, reflective gear example of what not to do, you know. So you better acknowledge me, is what I'm saying. This is and here what we see playing out here is, of course, the part of depression which is narcissism. And this is true of anybody who is depressed, because the thing that you need to keep in your head if you're depressed, or else the depression stops making sense, is if you think I am the most terrible person who's ever lived, like I am like appallingly, egregiously, like astoundingly worthless, that is narcissism, because it suggests that you are in some way exceptional. It suggests that your badness is worth getting upset about. It's worth mourning over. I think that, like, the real sort of, like, clinical no-feelings depression happens when you get past that point and you realize that you are, in fact, not even exceptional or significant in your awfulness. But up to that point, it's got its mirror side, where you're going to be super up on yourself one moment, super down on yourself the other. And, like, the theatricality of your despair over all the terrible things that you've done in your life all holds the implication that all of the crimes that you committed, all of the people who you hurt, you were just so significant in the lives of everybody around you that it's an unforgivable crime that you did, rather than just a normal person fucking up like people do. And so letting go of that is part of, depending on your point of view, is either a part of getting better, overcoming the complex, or paving the way for your own, like, graceful elimination from the world. Look at this. This is telling a story, finally. We're getting close to the kingdom of heaven. Look at these columns. I love the way that the worlds, like, change slightly, even over the course of single worlds. Like, there isn't, unlike a lot of early NES games, there isn't, like, the ice level in this one. There is... You travel through a place, and then you get to an icy patch, and then the icy patch goes away. And here, you get all the way up to the Dome of Heaven, to the temple. Insert Sufjan Stevens lyric here. And it looks like it should look. It's environmental storytelling. We like environmental storytelling. It's an example of a good piece of design or art. I brought it back. You thought I forgot about that. So, like, you know, fun versus storytelling. Fun versus the imparting of information. Art imparts information. Art teaches you. Design is there to make your life easier. And there is, of course, nothing that says that an easy life and an informed life have anything to do with one another. Up to a certain point, perhaps, you know. The more informed you are, the easier things get. Like, if you know not to put your hand on the stove, if you know not to drink tainted water, you're probably going to have a better time. But, like, you know, the more you understand about, like, how nothing that you do within the course of your life is fundamentally going to matter and we're all going to die, that shit, you know, might stop you from having, a particularly... Oh, shit. The map. It's the map. It's a dead end with a thing in it. Not guaranteed, but super nice. Fucking game trying to undermine me by contradicting the points that I make about it even as I play it. Fucking hostile piece of design here. But regardless, so there's the fundamental distinction between art and design, that more information or more meaning doesn't necessarily improve your life. And good design is meant to improve your life. So, a game which sets out to needle you, which sets out to teach you things, being fun is probably going to be an important aspect of that, so that people will keep playing your damn game, and not, you know, throw their controllers down in disgust as you launch the harsh truths directly into their psyche. But also, you can't make that be your be-all and end-all, because if you do that, you're going to end up with something which nobody is enjoying very much. Where the fuck am I? I have a map. I have nothing to write on it with. Oh, I'm here. I think maybe I'll go down over there, see what happens. That where the fuck am I ramifies a little bit further, because I also have no idea where I was in that point that I was trying to make. Oh yeah, less fun. So, like, if you're ever in the position, as I often am, of making a case for a beloved game of your childhood, like, if you are, for example, talking to some young whippersnapper and being like, yeah, no, I really loved playing Secret of Mana when I grew up. Secret of Mana was just this, you know, I could play it for hours and hours and hours. It's the only game I ever, like, leveled all my stuff in, you know, level 99. You know, actually, Secret of Mana is a less good example than, say, like, a Final Fantasy game. You're left with, you know, somebody opening up and trying to play it and being like, this is just bad from many different standpoints. From, like, a design, you know, from, like, the design of the interface through... Am I back where I fucking started? I'm sick of going in circles, video game. From the design of the interface down through, you know, the fact that you have to grind in order to win, to, you know, through all of this nonsense. There's really not a whole lot that you can... Fuck. Okay, fine. We don't go this direction. Jeez. But, like, you know, on there, I feel like you can't if you took the grinding out of out of a JRPG, then you wouldn't have the thing in it that I found so valuable, which, you know, above and beyond the plot. I mean, let's look at the very best case scenario, a game like Earthbound. You wouldn't necessarily find anything. I think the storytelling would lack a certain amount of its zhuzh if you took out the pitiless difficulty and the need to grind and the sort of the exhaustion that sets in when you get to the end, near the end of one of the larger dungeons, particularly if you haven't prepared properly. I think that's a fundamental part of, you know, the suffering that needs to be, you know, expressed. And like, I think that Mother 3 is in some ways not quite as successful because it maybe going down immediately is the way to go. Oh shit, okay. This room looks familiar, but it's not the same room. It's not the same room at all. Excuse me. Fuck off. The point being that Mother 3 is perhaps not as successful as Earthbound because it makes its themes perhaps a little too explicit through the storytelling and maybe not as explicit through the medium that we're actually dealing with, which is the medium of video games. The particular strength of a video game is to be a video game. It's not to be like, you know, a novel or a fantasy story. So we already did this, didn't we? Didn't we? Oh god. Oh god. So I think that, you know, like the clunky aspects of that kind of game design are totally a part of what makes the game, you know, good as a piece of storytelling. However, you can't deny, particularly when you're trying to get somebody who's new to the game to play it, that it is really kind of a drag, you know, when you're comparing it, for example, to something that, yes, you could... It is kind of a drag when you're comparing it to something which is like, you know, made with the comfort and good time of the person who's playing the game in mind. Who would ever be interested in that? If I was interested in that, I sure as hell wouldn't be playing this now, would I? Where am I? Oh god, this is so disorienting. It's so awful. Have I been here before? Is this room of spikes that is exactly identical to 17 other rooms of spikes? Oh god, no, I'm falling and I can't control it. Oh no, I'm here again. Oh, this is so sweet. It really is. There's something so fundamentally enjoyable about just hurting and hurting and hurting and hurting in the bowels of this game. No! Fuck me sideways. Oh, where the fuck is the nurse's station? Will somebody please direct me to the nurse's station? I am in need of a band-aid. Oh no. Well, here's me. I'm an eggplant. This is fundamental to my condition. I think maybe the ideal video game is one where you are always an eggplant, don't you think? Well, this is a good place to wrap it, I think. We have maybe one more session of this. I think that you and I together, like, if I can make the assumption that you and I together is a thing that we have been able to communicate with each other on some level here, I think that we've come a long way. I think we've discovered a lot together. And perhaps that will be enough to take us through the final goddamn area. Dead end, really bad, really egregious dead end. Oh no. See you next time.